The opening paragraph of Alejandro Jodorowsky's Wikipedia lists him as a novelist, screenwriter, a poet, a playwright, an essayist, an actor, a comic book writer, a musician, a philosopher, a puppeteer, a mime, a psychologist, a draftsman, a painter, a sculptor, and a spiritual guru. But he is perhaps best known as a film director, having established a cult reputation with acid western El Topo and the psychedelic fantasy The Holy Mountain, both made in the 1970s. He continued to work through the 1980s, but his filmography was a barren desert from 1990 until 2013 and 2016, when The Dance of Reality and its sequel, Endless Poetry, were released. These films see the elderly auteur narrates the early part of his own life, beginning in 1930s Chile. Alejandro is a scrawny, effeminate boy with a heavy-busted operatic mother and a macho, mustachioed father whose quest for masculine honor leads him to disrepair and humility under the shadow of tyrannical Chilean president General Ibanez. Endless Poetry shows the salad days of a young Jodorowsky in Santiago as he flourishes creatively and sexually. Both films are full of circus tricks and brassy public parades, overflowing with colour and costume. You're listening to MoveTube, the podcast that's all dressed up with nowhere to go, although cinemas are now open again in London under Tier 2 regulations. Writing in a publication known as Queen's Mobs in 2015, the esteemed writer Owen Vince described The Dance of Reality as a beautiful and strange and daring film. Owen joins me as ever. A bold claim. Do you stand by it?
Well, it's interesting because I reviewed that film 5 years ago. My memory is shaky. I think I had seen it at the ICA. It struck me as amazingly remarkable. That was my first encounter with Jodorowsky. I knew him because of El Topo and Holy Mountain, which I had not seen and have seen subsequently, which is kind of weird because Endless Poetry and Dance of Reality are both very, we were talking before about films made by older people looking back on their lives, and we were digging around for a fucking example. This is it, although it doesn't fulfill that format because it's not like a reverie so much as a kind of like it doesn't look like an old person's film, as it were. This is both of these films are made by someone at kind of the height of their creative powers, considering he's fucking like 87 when he started making fucking this trilogy. It's going to be a trilogy apparently of films, and yeah, so they're reflections back on his life as a octogenarian, and kind of mining his youth, because as a true artist, like Jodorowsky knows that like the portrait of the artist as a young man is the ultimate exploration for any artist to explore, I think, or any path for an artist to explore, because they're amazing, right? These films, like I've no like, yeah, I stand by my my Juvenilia actually, and I'm like, these are insanely joyous films to watch. Even if, like, when we were talking about it, it was a bit like, I mean, we were sharing WhatsApps originally, and we were like, I'm not sure if I'm completely on board with like this late Jodorowsky stuff. Like, I don't know, but like having re-entered their orbit, they slap so hard, these two films. Oh my god! I mean, just on surface level, do you echo that, or am I preaching to the choir?
So one of the things this podcast has yet to truly harbour is a genuine conflict, and I'm pleased to say yes that we are on the precipice of one. I thought these films were fucking awful. No, I detested them. I found them a real clock watch to wade through. I thought they were sentimental. I found them gauche. I thought there was a complete lack of cinematography. I thought this sort of
that's true. That is true. This
overwhelm of symbolism was just kind of really, really pat and rubbish.
You see, ladies and gentlemen, Ralph is a young, serious artist, and he can only accept Bellatar, if it's not fucking like 8 hours long in Hungarian, in like a rare, like dead Hungarian dialect. It's like, well, actually, the first 47 minutes are actually of a cow's udder, and I think it's just really interesting.
Cool. Tell me more. You finished?
Tell me more, because I agree with some of your points there. Like the cinematography is kind of whack in these films. It's not
weird because the second one is DP'd by Christopher Doyle, who like did In the Mood for Love, and is like a kind of like kind of the only famous cinematographer, right? Like like there isn't really like a genuinely like there's a lot of like production design that is obviously very well thought out. It's not like not to my taste, but it's like well done. But then the shots are just like not really.
They're kind of crappy.
They're not cinematic shots. It feels like a play being kind of documented.
Yeah, because I was watching the beginning of Orson Welles' The Trial the other day, right? And which is a remarkably, strikingly kind of expressionist film in some ways. It's shot in some ways, and it opens with this beautifully. Because I was comparing these films, even though they're not related at all, but like it opens with this beautifully composed shot at an angle of a sleeping man's head, and it's like that's beauty, that's cinematic beauty. Whereas Jodorowsky, like it feels like the cinematography was an afterthought.
If the cinematography was an afterthought, what was the first thought? And I think the first thought was like this deep, strong desire to express a particular, like his upbringing, a particular moment. I read up a bit on psychomagic, which is which is a form of magic that I believe Jodorowsky himself developed. Which an example of it is if you're embarrassed about your sexuality or the sexual dimension of your life, then you wear a golden penis around your waist for like a large golden cock for
it's sympathetic magic. There's something kind of primitive and sympathetic about magics. Yeah. It
involves symbolism, and it involves kind of an element of exposure to your fears. So there's a bit in the film where the young boy is afraid of the dark, and his mother comes in with black paint, and they black up, I suppose.
Black up.
I'm not going to throw that accusation at
it's interesting you said it, because that happens in Ennis poetry as well. There's an earthquake, and his father tells him, he's like, laugh in the face of the earthquake, laugh in front of your fears. Like it's very on the nose, right? And maybe that's why I like it, because it is. I don't think this is great cinema, but it's effective cinema, and with an A. Like it affected me. I think partly because I can sympathize with the journey he's kind of nostalgically revisiting, his first poetic pulses and impulses. There's something very amazing about that. But you're right, it's not in any way beautifully shot. It is. There's no color grading or any, like, it's literally like we filmed it with a digital camera. Considering it's like, oh well, in some scenes there's hundreds of extras. It's like you've got the money to have done but I don't think that's a concern.
But there is lighting and stuff. It's just that I think there's a lack of intimacy to it. I think it's all quite clowny, and I think like I respect I like clowning. Like I've done a bit of clowning myself, and it's like there are clearly like important strands of tradition in what he's doing. It doesn't feel like it has anything to do with the tradition of cinema, which I guess is probably why it like gets my goat a bit. There's an interesting quote from him where he says, "I am not mad. I am trying to heal my soul." And I sort of feel like if Jodorowsky was listening in on this conversation, he would say to me like, like I don't care about making a good film. That's not important for me. Like what's important for him is this kind of spiritual process of like capturing a childhood and like a series of dynamics, and obviously all the stuff that his father doesn't actually in real life go on that big journey of like trying to kill Ibanez and like being like
which is quite amazing,
his identity and becoming homeless. Like it's an amazing journey that sort of expresses is like a metaphor for like how his father was to him when he grew up, and I sort of, as a form of storytelling, I kind of admire that, but I just think it's totally not fit for purpose in regards to a film.
No, because I think you're right when you say there is little regard for the work as a cinematic endeavor, because I don't think there's referentially, and I think a lot of film works through its referentiality or its desire to break referentiality, and I don't think that's here. I think cinema is just the most accessible medium to him, and I think, like I said, when he was younger, because this is an autobiography, as we see, he was a poet, he was a puppet maker, candlestick maker, soldier, thinker, sailor. He's kind of done everything, right? And I think this is just, he's one of those kind of I don't think he's an auteur, but he's also polymath. I kind of use that term very loosely, but I think cinema is just the most visually explosive medium in the biggest way to kind of project himself onto reality. I think it's hard to do this with paintings unless you're like Anselm Kiefer. It's hard to do it with sculptures because sculpture can only be seen, in one room or whatever. Like, this is his biggest way to make a splash, I think, which is why, like, that's what it feels like. We're seeing someone just marshal these huge energies to kind of retell his story in the dwindling years of his life. I think because he could go on fucking it forever.
Yeah. I mean, he looks great for his age.
He looks great for his age because he's already scheduled Sons of El Topo, which is El Topo's sequel, and a third part, or so Peter Bradshaw has said, a third part of this trilogy, which will be his kind of Francophile years. But yeah, I'm interested to unpick for you. So what? Actually, no, that's the wrong question. What did affect you about these films?
The best bit of it for me was right at the end of Dance of Reality, the first film, where the father finally comes home from his crazy journey and admits that he's been violent and been like cruel, and has sort of denied. There's an element of him admitting that he's denied the sensitive aspects of his son and also denied the sensitive aspects of himself. That feels true emotionally. There was an element of like don't know if anyone listening's ever done family constellations, which is a form of therapy where like you get different people to like stand around and like represent different members of your family, many of whom have died or not, you're not in contact with anymore, and you use the sort of the process of representation to kind of access like a some kind of emotional like resolution where you feel like better about what happened, and I feel like that this film serves something of that purpose in the form of representation, but like the representation is precisely the thing which like pisses me off.
It's like a ghost intervention.
Yeah, exactly. Like. The other thing I want to reference, I don't know if you've seen Hourglass Sanatorium by Wojciech Has.
I haven't, no.
It's like a Polish film about, I think I've referenced it before on this show. It's like one of my favorite films. It's a Polish film about this guy who visits his father in a sanatorium in Poland, and when he arrives at the sanatorium, the doctor says, he says, "Is my father alive?" And the doctor says, in here he's alive, but in a more general sense, no, he's dead. And the sanatorium has kind of frozen time, and by entering the sanatorium, you enter this kind of dream space where like they keep people alive by turning the clocks back, but like everything's kind of in a state of disarray. While he stays at the sanatorium, like the whole process of like the effect of Nazi Germany on the Jewish community across Europe is kind of like played out, like, and you see these, and it's sort of like it's like a dream manifestation of like the Holocaust via the eyes through the eyes of a child.
That's interesting. To me it sounds like Bertolucci's The Conformist. The scenes in the mental hospital in The Conformist. Do you remember those? There's almost upside down scenes in The Conformist. Anyway, it's just visually that was like jumping out to me. I need to see the Hourglass Sanatorium. Maybe that will be on our list in the
post
future.
movie. We can venture towards a film like that. Yeah, I mean that film is like the reason I bring it up is like it's for me like a perfect example of like a probably quite an autobiographical story for Has, because he was a Polish Jew whose father, and that the timings match up, and it uses like absurdity and a dream-like fantasy world to convey how things felt. So there is an element of like representation happening, but it's done without any kind of it's done without the self-consciousness of these films, and it's much less tidy. I think this film has a crazy, like almost like a sort of Hollywood musical. People suddenly appear and rejoice and start doing everything. Just feels like it's like walking into a toy shop and just watching all the sort of things.
Yeah, it's like a costume cupboard coming to life, and I think even from the way it's shot in this very crisp, clear, almost too real high definition. kind of creates this unreality, and I think it's an unintentional effect, because I think he's actually quite an unintentional filmmaker. And kind of last week when we were talking about Manny Kao, one thing Manny Kao is a vastly different filmmaker in so many ways. And Manny Kao does, in an interview, does talk about the artist or creator or filmmaker or whatever kind of serving ends that they're not aware of. And I think in a way Jodorowsky is one of the most, even while he's looking intentionally inside himself for these films, and his own life is the material that he's constructing this artifice out of, he's not very aware and he's not very conscious about what he's doing. And we were talking about how particularly Endless Poetry, the kind of second film, is deeply Freudian in its kind of structure. There is the relationship between father, mother and son. The same actress that plays his mother plays the character's muse and first non-penetrative sexual partner, the fiery poet that he kind of falls in with for a while. His father, I believe, also plays dictator Ibáñez at the end, and he has this kind of the physical fight with his father at the end of the film, like as it were, wants to destroy and kill his father.
I mean, these metaphors and parallels I just find so tedious.
But
obvious.
I think they're unintentional. I think it's literally that is Jodorowsky's life. I think he's almost, if Freud, he could imagine him being one of Freud's like classic patients, because I think he's unintentionally doing this because his life is reducible to these core human conflicts. It makes him a very human director. In reality, I think there's two undercurrents here, and it's two modes of psychoanalysis kind of battling it out unconsciously through his films. And one is this Freudian, the other is this schizoanalysis, which is Deleuze and Guattari, because for them this is desiring production. Desire is not a negative space to be filled, it is a productive capacity. It generates reality. And he kind of says as much when the young Alejandro Jodorowsky in Endless Poetry is kind of going through his apprenticeship as a poet. And he says, poetry is an act. There's no books, he doesn't write anything down. Poetry is performance, it is a done thing. And it just shows that, like, I think it's Jodorowsky celebrating creation as being plugged into your kind of almost schizoid creativity and your endless capacity for creative production. I think that's kind of what it celebrates. But I don't think that's a conscious thing. I don't think he's a smart, as it were, filmmaker in that way. He's not drawing on psychoanalysis or psychoanalytic theory to make these films. I think it's just he's so on the level, he's so transparent about how he goes about creating art that you can't help but talk about it in these with big terms like Oedipal complex or fucking schizoanalysis or desiring production. I think all these things are just there because he's so upfront, and I like that boldness about it. Like, don't get me wrong, I like my Bresson, but there's something kind of beautiful watching this and just affirming this is a celebration of creation, of the creative act, and a celebration of the poet in a general sense. You're shaking your head, Ralph. But I think
for listeners, we're in it because Owen's internet is bad. We're in a situation where a kind of police interrogation mirror where I can be seen but Owen cannot.
It's like The Wire, but we're talking about film. We're not in Bodymore anymore. Was it? I'm going to use a really pat word here, but inspiring, because I found it kind of inspiring because it celebrated creativity. Did it give you a celebration of creativity? Did it make you feel that?
I mean, as I said, on a personal level, the father-son thing right at the end of the first film kind of like hit maybe like a slightly personal chord with me. But that was like maybe more just me relating a bit to that whole thing about fathers. I think in terms of creativity, no, I didn't find myself like I really found it to be like exhausting, and I just kept feeling he made the wrong creative decisions. Like
he should have been a puppeteer or should have been a painter rather than
I mean, this is the thing. Like I guess it's funny that when I read the intro, you couldn't tell that I didn't like the films because no, like I read out a long list of his like various different métiers, and to me I guess like it feels like I think it's just kind of ridiculous to do that, to say I don't think he wrote his Wikipedia thing, but like to have that many different things that you do, I think it's just a fucking joke.
I think he's one of those 20th century artifacts, right? He's like the Picasso, or this, like, I can be a librettist, I can be a painter, I can be a sculptor, I am an artist with a capital A, and I think he wouldn't be ashamed of calling himself.
Yeah, but Picasso only really did visual art.
No,
like,
true.
well.
But I mean, I use that in terms of the figure. He sees himself as an artist, as something that supersedes. It's not about a particular medium. It's about a worldview which is their own, and it's unique, and it's unimpeachable and untranslatable to anyone else, really. Which is, I think, in a way, it's kind of the ethics of that is kind of unappealing, maybe to me generally, because I'm more interested in art that makes me feel complex and complicated and tries to do that empathetic reaching out beyond itself.
Yeah.
And I don't think he does it. I guess it's quite selfish. They're quite selfish films in a way, I guess.
Yeah, I think this is a thing I used to say that was... this is a thing I used to say to people that's quite cruel, and I don't say it anymore because I don't like to say cruel things. But this thing I used to say was... art is a good form of therapy, but actually therapy is a better form of therapy. And I feel like these I mean, I'm actually quite anti-therapy now. Well, I mean, therapy, there can be different forms of therapy, but like I think that art when he says this thing in the Guardian interview about like I'm not mad, I'm trying to heal my soul, I almost don't want to par these films off, because it just feels like it's all part of some spiritual journey he's on to feel bad. It's like when someone kind of rabbits off about like self-compassion and like self-care and stuff, and you kind of want to critique
You've been
them.
looking at my Instagram stories again.
You kind of want to critique them because it's just like it's sort of neoliberal pap, but then also you're like, well, this is how this person like stops feeling anxious. So
in a way, there is something kind of neoliberal about it. In a way. No, I mean, you don't have to par them off. I mean, I agree with you in so many ways. I'm surprised at how much these affected me. And I think maybe it's just what I need right now. And I think it's very easy to exhaust yourself in the art world and the creative industries. I use that in a very kind of like anti-sprung way. But like, it's very easy to exhaust yourself by focusing on outputs and focusing on key performance indicators and focusing on, kind of growth targets and whatever, which kind of infect and determine the art world for most artists. Whereas, if you're one of the elect, even, the great visionaries, as it were, over time, like Anselm Kiefer, these big Sturm and Drang artists are ultimately commercial artists and sell the paintings before they've done them. Like for most like jobbing artists and creators, like your art has to be reducible to a one-page bit of wall text waffle and have all these different boxes that it ticks. I'm beginning to sound like the Joe Rogan podcast. But it in a way that kills your fucking vibe to create. So I think sometimes you need films like this because you look at them and go, this is what I don't agree with this guy's worldview, and I'm sure this person, the young Alejandro, would be an incredibly irritating little cunt. But there's something quite amazing about the raw celebration of creativity, I suppose, that doesn't explain itself through. This artwork explores X, Y, Z, A, B, C, using this, sort of Lawrence Lex Sino-futurism. It re-queers this kind of all that shit. It's like, no, this is just a kind of raw celebration. I mean,
there's a carnival joy to it, and if that gets people out of the office, or then I'm or the home office, then I'm
not
all
the
for
home
it.
office,
no, not the Priti Patel. But yeah, like obviously I'm like in favor of all things that like peel back the inhibitions, because I think we live in a very anxious, inhibited world. Like the we there is like left adjacent artist people, but it just didn't do that for me, and like a lot of things do that for me, like Kathy Acker and Fassbinder and like 100 Gex.
Because I was thinking about your affiliation with Fassbinder, and I think Fassbinder was engaged in a similar project in his work, but so different, so
Jodorowsky,
because in terms of like, it was a kind of Germanskans work, it was like this totalizing project to flagellate and understand himself. But whereas kind of Jodorowsky is a bit quirky and weird, like Fassbinder bared his soul again and again and again, and kind of ruined himself through the process.
We've got to review some Fassbinder on here, man. When we break free of the leash of movie, we're gonna be fucking.
We have to, man. You know, we have to like break out of this corporate structure, man. We're like just shills for the corporate
Jodorowsky,
movie.
though, he's. I made this remark on Messenger to someone. His films are like someone with bad tattoos.
Do you know what? Jodorowsky is basically every posh, creative, rich person I've met. Not like young creative, but like I've spent a lot of time with kind of like very wealthy people who have, you know, a second or third home in France and are really creative and do a bit of everything. It's like, oh, you know, I paint, I dabble, you know, I sculpt. I kind of
where's the suffering?
There's a lot. I think where's the suffering? I think Jodorowsky does have that, but he does appeal to that, you know, sort of the art for art's sake thing. You know, earlier I was kind of criticizing the KPIzation of of art, and then there's the extreme ulterior of that, the other face of that, the Janos face of that.
KPIzation, sorry.
Yeah, you know, key performance indicators, like the bureaucratization and the management of art. And then there's the other end, which is the art for art's sake. And I don't, you know, there's a kind of sweet spot in between these things, right? Like, it's good to know what you're doing. But I think, there's a kind of like posh funness to Jodorowsky, but it's still cut me to the core. Is he? No, he's not. No, he's struggled, but he appeals to that mentality, I think, of just, I'm just a bit of a dilettante, you know, do a bit of watercolors, do some sculpting. It's all nice, it's all fun. But there is suffering in his films, and I think, I don't know, I think it struck maybe I would, if lockdown wasn't happening, and my life was full and not a complete flatline at the moment, then maybe I'd have felt differently about these films. But
I was having a conversation with my friend Mikey about this, actually. Like, what's it actually going to be like when there'll basically be a month where loads of shows and like live gigs and clubs and stuff, like all the stuff that's been waiting, will be on, and you'll basically be able to like do something every night. And actually, my friend Mikey was saying, our friend was saying that that actually people will think that they want like this really hyper kind of like Netflixy sort of like everything all at once, positive joy, carnival energy, but actually what they'll want is like some art about suffering, because they've suffered.
Well, it'll be exactly, but I think it'll be business as usual, actually, because I was thinking that I think up until lockdown happened and coronavirus happened, the predominant mode amongst millennials, at least, was pretty much like, I'm too depressed to do anything, I'm too sad, I don't want to do anything, I'm just got social anxiety. And I'm not saying that in a neggy way, because that's me as well, but it's like people are, and it's also about our economy as well, and our society, that we are burnt out. We were, before coronavirus, we were burnt out, exhausted, poor, many of us oppressed in various ways, like you know, particularly if you live in like an urban capital, but it's different in rural areas for sure, right? But it was not a nice, beautiful world where we were all doing everything we wanted to at once. Before, people were fucking exhausted. There's that great meme
with where it's like from Peep Show, it's like the Olivia Colman character. It's like everything being like it was before, like not even necessarily that good, just normal. And then behind her is Johnson from Peep Show, and it just says, some geezer eating a fucking bat.
Really good. But I think there is that, like, we were not in a good place before coronavirus just intensified the burnout and the precariousness, the precarity of modern labor and modern existence. And I think shit was bad before this, and I'm not trying to be super doomy about it. Like, it will be good to not have coronavirus kicking around anymore.
When people listen to this podcast, it will almost be a year ago to the day that Labour lost the election.
And remember what, like
in 2019, it's actually 2019 right now. The time is 2019. 19 years past.
2020 never happened.
That's spooky.
You know, we actually, Ralph, are you right? You just woke up from a coma. It's the day after Labour lost the election.
Out in Putney,
are you okay? You look like you had a really bad. You're in Putney. You collapsed on knocking on the door. You're right, mate. Look, you've had a really bad dream. It's like, whoa, there's a coronavirus.
I'm pretty sure we haven't talked about Jodorowsky for about 10 minutes.
No, we haven't. But it's,
there
I
we
think
are,
it's
avoiding our conflict.
There's only avoiding our conflict. But no, Jodorowsky, I think one of the best things about Endless Poetry, and I think actually Endless Poetry was less good than A Dance of Reality because it was a much more normative film. It kind of raised my ears when I was reading this Peter Bradshaw review. He was like, well, it's the most narratively normal of Jodorowsky's films. I think his masterpiece. It's like, no, not really. Like, Dance of Reality is much
Bradshaw,
more inventive.
You bald fuck.
Fuck you, balding fuck. But Endless Poetry is just a bit sentimental and pap, and it's fine. It's just quite inspiring. But I think Dance of Reality is a lot more inventive and weird.
I think the father narrative like pulls it back from me because it's not about him as well. That's like... That's also good. But
I think it's at the end of Endless Poetry that there is a confrontation between and a kind of a rapprochement between father and son, which is clearly therapy in the sense of like Jodorowsky. And actually the actors, the father and son of the film, are Jodorowsky's son and his son. It's his son and grandson. And the two characters have this physical fight when Alejandro is about to run away to Paris to kind of join the Surrealists. A bit late, mate, but fine. And they fight, and then they kind of have this tearful kind of like confrontation. And actual Jodorowsky appears, this Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and kind of brings them together and tells them what to say. He tells them their lines, and he says, "You should say this. Say it like this." And there's this head shaving scene. The son shaves the father's head. They kiss on the lips twice, and it's super weird. And it's quite powerful. That affected me.
It's basically an instructional video for psychomagic, right? His form of therapy.
Family magic.
And it's similar to
family
constellations, like family constellations therapy, which is like an effective form of therapy in that it does like bring up huge emotions through like representation and metaphor. And I get that, but like
symbols,
it doesn't, especially when you're doing it with like members of your family. Like it's so intimate and like, but it's so intimate. That's his son with his son's grandson.
It's a literal family tree.
Like what? Like that's.
It's kind of fucked up, but I think I kind of like, in a way, I felt very moved by it because it was kind of Jodorowsky fixing the mistake he made, because this really happened according to Jodorowsky. They really had a big fight. He ran away to France and he never saw his father again, and they left on bad terms. And obviously in his later years he's regretting that, kind of the years have passed, and he's like, what I would have given to have made it up with my father one last time. And he's kind of fixing that. It's an unfixable thing, but he's kind of fixing it in his mind. And for me, that's the point where it stops being a film and it's irrelevant. This is a film at this point. This is a man's confrontation with his own past. So at that point, it wasn't a film anymore. It was just a really human, really sad, deeply fucked up. Because I was watching it and I was like saying out loud, I was like, fuck, this really happened. Like, this is a real pain that Jodorowsky, the man, has actually gone through. And he's kind of putting it all out there. And I was like, that's, the rest of the film is kind of fun and fancy. But that was the moment where I was like, fuck, man, that's like really, really tragic and quite powerful. Again, I think he meant it in weird, I don't know, like, it's hard to say, like I was saying, a lot of what he does is unconscious, but that felt like one of the few times where he was being actively conscious and difficult. It kind of affected me quite deeply. But I don't know, maybe I'm just all emotional and shit because of coronavirus.
I mean, it's nice. I think I just really, by that point, obviously I was still watching, but like I had kind of disengaged from the project so much that scene didn't have that effect where it might have otherwise done. So I can see that, and I the father and son thing at the end of the first film, as I say, did move me, but I think you have, as a filmmaker, you have to do more than that.
Because it's not, like you said earlier when you said it's not really they're not really films, or they're not intentionally trying to break the formulas of cinema. They're just not films. They're just kind of cameras. Because I don't think films. I think the point of films is to like solve problems in the past. Like I think what I want to see a film do is like is like accept things and just kind of like
honor them with like the beauty of a truthful depiction and expression, you know, rather than, I don't think in my own life I'm willing to do kind of therapeutic experimentations with like re-inhabiting role play and stuff, but it's just it kind of alienated me, especially because he's so visible in the whole process. If he'd made it about, you know, there's that really sort of interesting, I was about to say great, and then I like downgraded it to interesting, which is kind of the worst thing you can say about a film. But there's a Polish film called "You Have No Idea How Much I Love You," which is like a role play of a family therapy, of a mother and a daughter therapy, and it's like basically an hour and 10 minutes of like this mother and daughter who are actually actors, like replaying lines that were really said by people in therapy. And it's like, just this very emotional kind of series of confrontations between mother and daughter, and stripped back and intimate in that way, and being the product of some kind of documentary process. Like, I love that film, The Work, in prisons, and like the act of killing. Yes. Like, there are films where like there's, but I think those films like selfless. Those films like not indulgent in this. They're not like narcissistic.
Yeah, because Oppenheimer is surfacing. In Jodorowsky, he is fully conscious of the kind of fault lines and repressions in his life, and he's putting them out there, whereas Oppenheimer is using the act of play and the act of simulation to surface people's buried, repressed, shitty past, right? And it's the act of play is essential to uncovering the truth, because a straight documentary with Oppenheimer wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't, because the shocking thing about Oppenheimer's film, The Act of Killing, is because it is formally brilliant. It's a formally brilliant solution that was completely unique to film. It had to be film. It had to use the genres and stereotypes and tropes of cinema in order to surface the horrible things that these people had done and still believe. And
it's very generous in that process. Like what the Act of Killing does is like incredibly generous, because it gives a form to a thing in real life. And I think my problem with Jodorowsky is he like has no respect for the form, you know. No, it's anti-formalist. He'll just use any form to like service this like thing that he's trying to do, but then like I think form is always important, like even if you're trying to like
I agree. I think it's kind of it's aesthetic ethics in a way are kind of empty, but I think it's interesting when you landed on Oppenheimer, because I think the act of killing has a frivolity about it, but the frivolity serves ends beyond itself. It looks like you could watch like a trailer of, if you didn't have sound, you could watch like a trailer of The Act of Killing and think that looks like a fun, weird film.
Yeah, it has a very similar aesthetic to Dance of Reality.
It's really similar aesthetic to Dance of Reality, but when you actually watch it, like the first time I watched it, I was like, fucking hell, this is like an incredibly ethically dodgy, brilliant film. And the only solution that was available to Joshua Oppenheimer to surface the horrific holocausts that these people had done, you know, and he doesn't judge them either.
That's the thing, because he's not trying to achieve a particular outcome, I don't think.
No,
like he definitely achieved something with it, but like I don't think there's like, whereas I think with Jodorowsky it's like he wants to heal. Everything is about healing, and it's a bit like what's that word? It's a beautiful word, proselytizing. Like I can never handle I can't even say the word. I can never handle proselytizing. I was even like talking to my neighbor about my mic moved a bit. I was talking to someone recently about vaccines, and she was being skeptical about the vaccine, and I felt suddenly very compelled to say no. The vaccine, whatever vaccine we get, you know, it will have been reviewed and it will be tested, and it'll be very, you know, don't be skeptical about the vaccine. We need to all take it. And I immediately found myself proselytizing, and I like hated myself. Like, I hate how I sound when I'm trying to make someone think something.
How did she? I'm curious. How did she take it? Was it just okay?
We're good friends, and she sort of respects my opinion on things, so it softened her view a bit. But I realised that I'd sort of derelicted the normal mode of being with her in order to say all these things, which felt horrible. But I just was kind of in this thing. The thing about vaccines, I just got pissed off. I was like, why are my friends being anti-vaxxer? That's fucking crazy. Anyway. But like
that's a whole other debate.
She's a lovely person, and I can totally understand why people are like skeptical.
But do you really want Bill Gates to put a microchip in your urethra? Because I don't, no, but I think to take it back to Jodorowsky, I think I'm glad we've found a bifurcation here, and we disagree.
Phenomenal.
But in different ways, and I can see where you're disagreeing from, and I agree. Like these aren't.
I can see where you're disagreeing from as well. By the way, I think about creative.
Let's agree to disagree.
Like the idea that it sort of unleashes one to be like joyful and creative, and to work with clowning, and to be like to be celebratory of creativity, and like that it depicts someone who was brought up. Where creativity and being effeminate was like discouraged, and that it sort of shows someone coming out of that. That's like an important aspect as well, because my upbringing, just like speaking for myself, like I was brought up in quite an effeminate way, and in a very creative way, and that's being encouraged to make art all the time. So that's like something I just sort of like don't relate to, and like
that's interesting. Because I think maybe one of the reasons I kind of relate more to this is that I grew up in a small coastal town in Chile where I was forced to wear my grandfather's blonde wig. My mum sung an opera, and my dad was a harsh communist owner of a lingerie shop, and I'd be beaten if he caught me reading poetry. So I can really, I resonate
really pissed
with the project. No, it's weird. I think art wasn't kind of accessible to me when I was a kid, so I wasn't discouraged at all. It just was never on the table or up for discussion. Art galleries were not a thing that existed. Concertos didn't exist, novels didn't exist, nothing. So I had to kind of discover those things for myself. So if anything, it was discouraged by my environment and by myself, because there was, why aren't you skateboarding, or why aren't you drinking White Lightning, or why aren't you doing nothing, kind of thing. So I think I kind of, there's an element of it which speaks to me about this kind of almost like flourishing of your artistic sensibilities is quite powerful for me. But I'm not attaching any greater like class analysis to it or anything like that. I just think maybe it just struck a note with me. But it struck a note anyway. I just think it's a very glorious celebration of one person's career and their kind of emergence as a creative person. I think there's lots of micro stories in there that could be handled really beautifully. Like you said, the conflict between father and son is the most real bit in the film, and maybe there's a different other filmmakers would have handled that. I mean, who for you handles that the best? Father-son dynamic.
Hourglass Sanatorium by Wojciech has probably the best, but fuck, what else? I can't precisely pick out a Tarkovsky film, but I always feel like Tarkovsky films are about fatherhood. There's like always this,
particularly the death.
Yeah, there's always like
the death of Andrei Tarkovsky.
There's like a thing,
which is not obviously by Tarkovsky, but
yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think Charlie Chaplin's The Kid. It's not about a father and son, but like there's a kind of fatherliness to him towards the kid. Yeah, how about you? What are your favourite daddy issue films?
I don't know if it's a subject I've been aware. This is really bad for like a podcast on films, and I'm coming up kind of not being able to stump up an example. I really can't. I need to think about that. I need to come back.
Maybe we should make one.
About what?
There's actually an amazing one by Zweiginzer, Andrei Zweiginzer. If you know that guy, who he sort of started off making like very drama-y films that had like a Tarkovsky look to them. And now he's like basically the most famous serious filmmaker in Russia. A lot of his films have like quite tough fathers, but there's a particular one called The Return.
The Return, of course. Yeah. An amazing film.
But that's a great one about
two
fathers,
boys who's I watched that at the beginning of lockdown and completely forgotten about it, and he's a phenomenal filmmaker, and that film is actually deep, really powerful, about two young boys whose father's been in prison pretty much their whole life and returns to them and takes them on a fishing trip to a kind of Siberian island, is the only way I can describe it. Zagintsev, I think there's a lot in British cinema and English cinema, even like Shane Meadows. I think the idea of fatherhood or surrogate fatherhood, like Dead Man's Shoes in particular. There's a kind of like idea of like surrogate fatherhood and kind of, absent fathers and brothers who function as fathers, or dysfunctional families, because in every dysfunctional family the father is present through their absence. And Shane Meadows is quite good at that, actually. Whatever you have to say about Shane Meadows and kind of kitchen sink drama generally, Dead Man's Shoes, Dead Man's Boots, I think actually is really, really good.
I think we should do a dad's episode. We're going to do lots of episodes
for Father's Day,
2021. We're going to have a more thematic, more free-flowing approach to the pods. But next week, we have a special guest.
Got Lara coming on, Lara Alonso, to talk about Meek's Cut Off
by Kelly Reichardt.
By Kelly Reichardt, which I'm really excited about. It's been a long time since I've seen it. And then we've got so basically, like Ralph was alluding to, next week will be our last official constraint episode where we only watch films on Mubi. As of the week after, where we're going to review It's a Wonderful Life with Daniel Niafutu, friend of the pods. We're going off piece, and we're going to just do films we like, because why the fuck not? Life's short
and wonderful.
So we'll be doing a lot more. And life is short and wonderful, so we'll see.
Let's hope 2021 will be able to wonderful. You never know, really.
But we will be able to do Algarve Sanatorium. We'll be able to bring you all your faves, problematic or not. We'll be able to do Tarkovsky, which we'll get to do Antonioni, which I know we've both been like chewing at the bit to do. So I think, and we'll be a lot more open to kind of themes and also suggestions as well, now that the pot pool is open slightly.
And hopefully we'll be able to do some more IRL shows when lockdown restrictions relax.
Yeah, I'm excited about the possibility of a real physical.
Love to do one with a guest, like an IRL one with a guest. Although we don't have enough microphones, do we? That's interesting.
We've got enough microphones. We've got a Zoom. We can do whatever the fuck. We can share microphones.
I'm looking forward to Zoom referring to the the audio recording devices again, as they did before March of last year.
The good old days. I can't wait. Get it back to. That's what we talk about. The return of normality is like, the good old days when a Zoom meant a portable field recorder.
On that note, listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to a tremendous episode of MoobTube. Catch you in a week.
Peace out.
Stay safe.